Hey everyone, I'm taking a little moment to talk about midwittery in gaming, but first we need to define a midwit. I am a midwit. Here, in my sexualization and body image video, I used surface level statistics that indicated something like 46% of gamers were women. I didn't feel like it mattered to the overall point I was trying to make. It very much mattered. Many people in the comments pointed it out, and one referenced a better study with a transparent method and bias. Conveniently, that actually strengthened my original point.
Unbelievable.
But it could have easily done the opposite, and I would have had to have worn my hat of midwittery. So at a base level, a midwit is when someone with slightly above or above average intelligence forfeits or overestimates their intelligence, and in turn draws a conclusion that even an idiot knows is wrong by simply looking out the window. I'll further this definition. A smart person can have a stupid opinion. It does not mean that a midwit is forever a midwit. It is just that they are engaging in midwittery at that moment in time. In short, hubris. Now, before we go any further, the tricky thing with midwittery is that a true midwit is incapable of reflecting on their shortcomings.
I mean, you're not educated enough. You're not bright enough, Vera, to talk to me.
So here is a little test. Answer this question honestly. Does propaganda work on you? If you answered no, and you have engaged in tertiary education, then there is a high likelihood that you will engage in midwittery or have in the past, and here's why. Propaganda statistically works. Propaganda always targets academics first and foremost. Propaganda always uses facts and statistics that are true by the numbers, but, and this is an important but, propaganda relies on the fact that you are a midwit and that your pre-existing bias towards academic enlightenment will force you to reject due scrutiny, so you'll never look into the framing of those facts and statistics. Very plainly, I went to university, I've been there. When you're 18, 21, you're smart enough to think you have the answers, you have the tools, your favorite lecturer is telling you that your parents are wrong and that's a cool sage thing to do, and you're simply too inexperienced to know that your mom and dad were probably right about many of the things that you deem trivial, and your lecturer is a social reject. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not only real, it is inescapable, and a highly predictable target market for ideologies that are crushed by simply having a conversation with a bus driver in your local pub. The irony is that the ideological capture that ensnares midwits in and out of state education results in these people often demonstrating with their actions that they are completely detached from common sense or the average human experience, while simultaneously crying out that they have the common folk in mind. Case in point, the recent US elections. So how does this relate to gaming? Well, it's very simple. Games journalism is a majority of midwits with identical ideologies that proudly parade as if their enlightened perspective is somehow not subject to due scrutiny, and it doesn't need to align with reality, because after all, these losers are building a utopia. How dare we stand in the way of their valid progress? To demonstrate, we're going to have a look at Nathan Grayson's article from November 1st titled "The Dragon Age Review Controversy Shows How Much YouTube and Twitter Have Poisoned the Video Game Discourse." So let's start with this. This would be classified as an opinion piece, but people often make the mistake of thinking that having an opinion closes you from facts or objectivity, and in the case of journalism, it's actually the opposite. That's one of the reasons why games journalism is dying. People don't care about your opinions if they aren't well reasoned, and one of the best ways to prop up your opinion is to be intellectually honest. From the top, to quote, "These days, when a big new game comes out, you can pretty much roll the dice of what kind of reactionary controversy it will produce. Are we looking at moral panic over trans characters, diversity consulting, games journalists being too positive, games journalists being too negative, some other quibble that will be forgotten in a week, interchangeably swapped out like grains of sand dragged away by the unrelenting tide? Anyway, the usual suspects got mad about Dragon Age, the Veilguard reviews this week." Guy writes like a MySpace blog. This is a posturing statement. For starters, it's not a roll of the dice to see what reaction will come out of the gaming community. It is quite consistent. Even the most dubious characters are pretty straightforward and consistent. This is an attempt at aloofness to indicate that Nathan is somehow above the gaming community and is therefore unimpressed and bored by its comings and goings. The idea that these issues are coming and going from the consciousness of people is also a bias toward media coverage and not a reflection of how the gaming community thinks. I don't like chocolate, but I don't enter a room and state that I don't like chocolate every day because I'm not a vegan, and I don't gain anything from being unlikable. Who are the usual suspects, Nathan? Why not just name them? What are you scared of? Your job is to report, so report. As a reader, my assumption is that the majority of YouTubers are in that box, which is true, and it makes you seem like a contrarian. Or are you scared that your readers will consume their content rather than yours and disagree with you? Let's continue. To quote, "You can listen to this week's episode of Aftermath Hours for a full rundown of why, but the whole thing is illustrative of a larger, more important issue. Thanks to algorithmic prioritization on sites like YouTube and Twitter, this is how a growing number of people engage with video games. Plenty of normal people still manage to tune out the hour-long rants and conspiracy theories, but at what point does this rancid flavor of brain rot go from a vocal niche to a borderline mainstream position? And what are the long-term consequences of that? Let me tell you a little story about algorithmic prioritization. I made a video about the Veilguard, and yes, I'm not a fan, and it had a little bit of satire. I have 10k subscribers. I was getting viewership rates of a channel with 200k subscribers for about 2 hours. Then the view counter froze for an entire day, so it looked like I only had 2,000 views when it had 16,000 views. I could only see it in the back end, and when YouTube fixed the view count, all the viewership died. For whatever reason, whether it be the algorithm or otherwise, YouTube killed my Veilguard video. Now, anecdotes are not a rule, but if my negative video about the Veilguard was killed, then I think that opens up the discussion to the idea that it might not just be that the algorithm prioritizes negative content and kills positive content, but we also know that we all have an attention bias to negative news. That's why you have journalistic terms like if it bleeds, it leads. This was true before the internet, so it's got very little to do with YouTube or Twitter. Anyways, I listened to the podcast, and this is a summary of Nathan and Co.'s theory. Google have monopolized advertising, and they have taken advertisers away from sites like IGN. Because these sites are not getting as much money, they can't afford better writers. Because the quality of writing is bad, people are going to YouTube as the default for gaming content. The next part is that people are being tricked into watching longer form content on video games by YouTubers because they equate the length of the video and the conversational nature to substance, and that they are especially attracted to contrary opinions of people that go against, and I quote, the popular orthodoxy or whatever. Okay, first problem, the quality of writing in games journalism wasn't a lot better. In the 2010s, you had Jason Schreier using a blog post about a games journalist committing essay against a cosplay manager as proof that gamers have a sexism problem. And you have articles by Nathan Grayson himself typing robot noises to make a point to the absurdity that games journalists were white knighting for sexual favors approximately a year before he was verifiably caught out sleeping with a radical feminist game developer. So I reject the notion that the quality of writing has really decreased, because quality writing also goes hand in hand with consistency and reasoning. I'll also just point out that Eric Kane is a real one. The guy deserves more subscribers. Next, people like me can use YouTube to get ad money. Do you know who else can get ad money? IGN, GameSpot, Rock Paper Shotgun. Any of these sites had massive advantages in terms of staff and resources to leverage the majority of the gaming market on YouTube or Facebook. It's not YouTube or Facebook's fault that they provided a more popular platform and that these gaming websites flailed around crying that gamers didn't respect their authority instead of doing their job, which goes hand in hand with the popular orthodoxy. Which is it? Are YouTubers the main method of game content consumption or not? Because if they are, then the consensus of YouTuber opinions are the popular orthodoxy. I'm going to trade out orthodoxy with consensus because unlike you guys, I'm not in the business of creating a religious movement. You don't get to decide what's normal for normal people, and this is an attempt at an ideological Trojan horse with an appeal to authority where the speaker conveniently places themselves as the arbiter. The goal of Nathan and Co., just building straw men in barns while labeling their opposition as conspiracy theorists, is actually a really remarkable feat. Nathan goes on to say, I guess my doomer build concern about all of this is that the American fascist project continues to grow in power, and all of these platforms facilitate these ways of talking about things, conspiratorial thinking and whatnot. First, let's look at a map. You see this area here? This area, it makes a lot of video games. It also generates a lot of money for the gaming industry, and unlike the US, it's a growing market. So look, I know a lot of people around YouTube are American, and American politics have a trickle-down effect. It's important to acknowledge that approximately half of gamers aren't American, and that number is growing. Understand that the line between brainwashed and cultured is purely dependent on who is listening. Your American fascist project is a bullshit exaggeration that requires a lot more supporting evidence to be taken seriously. Were the accusations more level and you had some supporting evidence, readers would not wash you as some flavor of radical. But can you really blame them? The whole bit requires a mountain of explanation, because it sounds like you think that everyone that you don't nerd like he's Hitler. But he goes on to quote, do you reach a point where this becomes the default? Because I would say that right now, this is still not the way most normal people talk about games or engage with them. A lot of people, as we see, even based on Dragon Age Steam numbers right now, saw this game, thought it looked cool, bought it, and now they're playing it. If you look at Asmongold's most viewed video about all of this, it has around 1 million views. 1 million sounds like a lot, but this game will probably be bought of north of 10 million people. So it's a fraction, and even then, a lot of people also watched that video, were probably never going to buy the game anyways, end quote. This is true, there are a lot of people that play games that have very little to do with the gaming community, and that's fine. I don't want to get into the Steam numbers with Veilguard because no one is being honest about that. Once the dust settles, everyone's going to look back on it and think, the Veilguard could have been a lot better, whereas people don't have that perspective of Origins. So having the perspective that marketing a known franchise works doesn't suddenly dispel the criticisms or make them wrong, especially on a personal level. Nathan goes on to dabble with a little numbers game based on Asmongold's YouTube video, but doesn't realize that the number of people that watch a video does not equate to the number of people that share a perspective, nor does it account for the fact that normal people that he's talking about do get their information by word of mouth. So the perspective of the gaming community is pretty important to the overall gaming space, as it should be. Luke, who's another member of the podcast, says this, to quote, I think an important thing to remember is we work in video games, and we work directly with people that know as much about video games as possible, and as much about the video game media ecosystem as possible. The people that follow us on social media, all they do is talk about video games all day. Our peers and colleagues and former colleagues, that's all we talk about. As a sample of the gameplay in public, we are a tiny fraction of people. All my IRL friends will talk to me about a Call of Duty game once a year. Everyone I play football with will talk to me about EA Sports FC once or twice a year to complain about it. They don't play Dragon Age. They don't know what it is. They barely know what Fortnite is. It's the same for everything. It's music, it's movies. People don't consume media about these things constantly on a daily basis. It's easy for us to lose track of that because we think everybody does, because everybody around us does. But my experience with this stuff, because I make it my point to know as many people outside of games as possible to avoid becoming a broken husk of a person, is that it's really important to get that perspective. It's fucking video games. No one cares. Play a game you like or don't. You don't need to go online and talk about it for 18 hours a day or whatever. So yes, people like Asmongold are out there making these videos, but like Nathan said, what's a video like that going to top out at? 1 million worldwide? Among English-speaking people? That's not shit. I don't know where to start with this one. So Luke's whole position is that because he doesn't have real-life friends that know what Dragon Age is, you, as a stranger that has nothing to do with Luke, shouldn't talk about it. And the reason why is that you may only get 1 million people agreeing with you. What kind of derangement is this? Like, yes, being invested in video games to the point that you make videos about it does make you part of a minority. So does standing at train stations so you can look at trains. Being part of a minority doesn't have any tangible downside in this scenario. Like, it doesn't mean they're bad or wrong because you don't agree with them. But I suppose it's the popular orthodoxy speaking through you right now in spirit, right? Like, that's what it is. You were sent from on high to tell strangers to stop looking at Eve and Stellar Blade or something? Is that how this works? Like, I love that he's saying that no one cares and that if you don't like a game, you shouldn't talk about it. Why? Because that position is reserved to you, speaking from a gaming podcast? What are you scared of? Again, he's referring to Asmongold, but Asmongold was actually very fair. He said that the game was better than he expected it to be. SkillUp's review was far more damning, and it has 2.2 million views. So are you talking about Asmongold because he's honest about his degeneracy and it makes it easier to discredit him from a normie perspective, or is it that there's some other motive at play? I'll let you decide, dear viewer. Nathan then goes on to state that there are 300 million people in the United States alone. You can't hear me banging my head against my desk, but this is peak MidWittery. They've talked about this for a long time. The reason why this is midwit propaganda is because they are assuming that people only form their views off of the media they consume. And so if a person does not consume that media, then it is not possible for them to have that perspective. They are basically making the assumption that all rational humans are going to have their perspective by default, and that something nefarious would have to come along and ideologically capture the rational people and steal them away from their way of thinking. They're also ignoring selection bias, and that is that people tend to seek out perspectives that they already agree with. On top of all of this, they are failing to dissect that the controversial talking point of the Veil Guard was the ham-fisted insertion of identity politics and the possible implication of where resources were spent in development because of said identity politics. You don't have to be a gamer at all to have an opinion on that, and many people do. So if you wanted to know what people actually thought, you would have to search out articles about identity politics in general and try to measure the overall public perception. And then after that, you need to factor in that you are making the assumption that non-English speaking people are somehow not going to think like Asmongold. And I have a hunch you're going to be disappointed. They even go as far as to falsely assume that Asmongold's average viewer is 13 when it's more like 30. This is the final point by Nathan. To quote, "But it's a radicalization engine for boomers. All of these things are radicalization engines. They all end up at the same place, despite starting at different points. If we're talking on radicalization engines, those are our main means of communication, and how long until everyone is some flavor of radicalized, and not for the better?" And again, you talk about polarized politics in our country, we're already part of the way there. I hope that things get better, but I think it will require a concerted effort on the part of those who want them to be better, to build something else. I think as long as we're doing it all on these platforms, there will be a slow but steady downward trend. End quote. This is the final point about YouTube and Facebook. First, Asmongold's viewers are 13, now they're boomers. Which is it? You know how I know these three individuals live in an echo chamber? Nathan literally whips out the term radicalization engine like he's writing the plot for a Ninja Turtles episode, and no one pulls him up on it to explain what the fuck he means. I've done podcasts. Even my most laid-back friends would not let that slide without explanation. But let's entertain this for a moment. Does YouTube intrinsically radicalize people? Is there a way that you can articulate how people are radicalized by the website? Because at a fundamental level, you can watch videos that interest you. The site shows you videos that are similar to videos you've watched before. You can like videos, you can dislike videos, you can comment on videos. Then you can be paid by YouTube through ad revenue, and you can make more money if you make more popular videos. Here's the most popular videos on YouTube. Is Baby Shark Dance radical media? Most of the lucrative videos on YouTube are songs for children. The most popular gaming video topics are Minecraft, Fortnite, and Grand Theft Auto. Those are the most incentivized video topics by YouTube. So it's not likely that YouTube's intended purpose is radicalization, and it certainly doesn't have such designs as to refer to it as an engine for that purpose. Now, what is true is that there is a culture war.
So perfect!
And Nathan and co are very firmly entrenched on the side that is not doing well on YouTube. And like all losers, a bad workman always blames his tools.
You are in that chair, Vera, because of your hair and your face and your gender.
I suspect that this is the grand delusion of three midwits that cannot fathom why they lost the popular vote, so to speak. So no, I don't think that YouTube is making people into nudesies and communists like Nathan wishes to imply. I think people are just calling each other nudesies and communists because they are midwits that don't have average people around them to say, hey, you know what, Nathan? That sounds interesting, but I don't watch the news anymore because they told me Kamala Harris was going to win and they lied. You kind of sound like them too. Also, I can't afford anything for $1 from the dollar store. In the scale of sensationalism to accuracy, you need to be more accurate than sensational to be liked. That is a line that you toe as a games journalist, and if you can't be right, then you can't be liked. And if you can't be liked, you are not entertaining or informative. So instead of loathing the cursed YouTubers and Twitter users for quote-unquote poisoning video games discourse, perhaps it would be more fruitful to answer the more important question, what value do you add to society as a games journalist if you are incapable of making good points?
Traitor.